Hi, guys. Welcome to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. This is Vevna Forrow. Yeah, let's get started. All right, guys. So, previously on the podcast, we discussed acceptance rates and where to find those percentages, stats, and metrics and everything. Yeah. So, listen back to that. And real quick before we dive into this episode, I want to share something. So, ironically, a few hours after that, like late at night, I was just looking at my social media feed and this came up. It was like so interesting because I was just talking about it, right? So I was like, this would be a great example, or it would have been for that episode, the previous one, number 9. So yeah, there was a post that a past contributor of Dippity that I was following had, screenshotted what the literary journal put of their, or literary magazine had put of their acceptance rates there. So they actually did a social media post for, everyone to see like how many submissions they got, how many they accepted for each category. And I love seeing that breakdown. We don't do that a whole lot at Dippity, and I know a lot of places don't really put all their stats and metrics out for each single call. But who knows, we may try to do that a little bit more besides just placing it in Chill Subs and a few other places where you can see those acceptance rates and this overall acceptance percentage. But anyways, so Viridine Literary, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, they had a really wonderful post. It showed that for poetry, they had a little over 700 submissions, and out of that lot, they had only accepted 31. So that was about a 4% acceptance rate. And then they had a breakdown of fiction, essay, script, art, and all the percentages for those categories, and then the overall acceptance rate. So that's really cool. It shows just how tough it is. And I know I say tough a lot, but it shows just how tough it is to get a slot or a publication, acceptance. And yeah, so I think in total they had almost close to 1,000 submissions, right? And it was really interesting to see that, and just, an example of how it can be considered competitive and things like that, to get a spot in a lit mag or journal, right? Because only a certain small percent, right, gets accepted. 4%, that's very, very tight there, and it's a little over 700 submissions. So just a prime example, of acceptance rates and how tricky it can be. So, when I mentioned competitive, and a lot of writers in the community, they're very supportive of one another, but when it comes to the submission process, right, it is very, it's like a marathon or a tight race, and sometimes there's very short windows. So then maybe it's like a 50-yard dash, right? Because you're racing to get your submission in before the deadline, or it can feel like the Olympics a little bit. That's what I'm trying to say. The Olympics of, lit mags and that whole world. That's more like it, right? So, yeah. Anyways, so yeah, listen back to that episode, and if you're thinking about starting a lit mag or journal, or if you're even thinking about submitting to places, don't worry a whole lot about metrics and numbers and calculations, but keep in mind that it is a good idea, if you start a lit mag or journal, to keep track of your total submissions, have a counter, and and do those percentage calculations, like the overall, and monitor how many submissions you get each month, and see if there's any spikes or trends. You can make your own Excel spreadsheet, or some, again, submission management systems have a good back-end reporting system. So yeah, just keep that in mind. And if you're a submitter, again, don't be terrified about, very low acceptance percentages. Again, I've gotten in a mix of places with very high, very low acceptance rates, and you just have to keep trying again. So yeah. Anyways, this episode. So for this episode, I want to talk about this. You may see the question of the day per se. So it sort of entails, ties into, things to think about when you're submitting to places again. So should you use a pen name when submitting to literary magazines, journals, and presses? Well, that is completely up to you. You have to think about it this way. So are you concerned about, privacy, right? Are you someone who likes to keep your writing life separate from your actual, other stuff in your life, right? Do you want to keep those worlds separate, or do you not care that people know this is your pen name and this is your real name, side by side? So, yeah, a lot of times, poets in the community, they'll say, and writers in general, they have a pen name because of, privacy reasons, and they want to keep their real name concealed for safety reasons even too, things like that. They want to be able to, write without, let's say, for example, you don't want your fam or folks or friends to read your work, right? And or to identify your work or come across it in Google search one day and like, hey, I didn't know you wrote poetry. Oh my God, I didn't know. And then they start talking about that poem and getting into it, but who knows? Anyways, let's say you don't want, the eyes of others, like obviously knowing who you are. Like if you're a very private person, yeah, pen name may be best to do that with. And when you feel ready, you can absolutely share that pen name and reveal your secret identity, right? Or, it's sort of like, I was thinking about this, guys. So it's sort of like, think about it this way. Do you want people to know that you are Spider-Man? I know we're not superheroes, but actually writing and art is sort of like a superpower, right? Writing art, it totally has saved others' lives in a sense. So that technically is true. It is a superpower. But yeah, so back to my analogy. So do you want people to know you're Spider-Man or Peter Parker? Do you want people to just know you're Peter Parker? Or do you want people to know you're Spider-Man, right? I know that sounds funny when I say it that way, but I'm serious. Same thing, like you could say Clark Kent, Superman, Batman, Bruce Wayne, do you want people to know, your true identity? And think about those characters. I know they're just superhero characters, but think about what happened when they revealed their identity, right? All their enemies came after them. But we don't have like a bunch of enemies in the writing world. Not me anyways. I hope not. Anyways, people have totally blocked others, I see that a lot though in the writing community, like blocking and stuff, social media. When, others perhaps are very, I've seen it sort of like in some cases, like things that have come up, but everyone for the most part's been really friendly. So there aren't enemies per se in the writing world or things like that, yeah. As long as you're an honest, true, kind person, you shouldn't have any problems with that. But anyways, yeah. So yeah, think about it that way. Do you want people to know your true identity? Is that going to cause problems down the road for you? Do you think it would? I know, some, think about it this way, best-selling authors, a good example, another reason why you might want to have a pen name, right? So think about it this way, Lemony Snicket, right? That's a fairly well-known name, a series of fortune events. I grew up reading that series. So think about it, if he had never used that pen name and he put his actual name, which is called Daniel Handler, it doesn't have the same ring to it, or zing as I call it, right? It doesn't have the same zing as it would on the series. He really developed this whole mystery over who is Lemony Snicket, for quite some time across his writing. And it was very cool to see that, that whole aspect of mystery and people not knowing who he was, or up to a point. And some authors have done that as well, and some poets in the community. I know a lot of people know Atticus, right, in the poetry world, and I don't read a lot of Atticus poetry, or, I don't even read some other well-known poets, and I'll get down there. I don't read every single poet's work in existence, but I'm aware of some poets for certain things, like, yeah, so some poets wear a mask all the time or try to conceal their identity. Sometimes, obviously, identities get revealed accidentally or, through others, right? And, it happens. But anyways, yeah. So it can be beneficial, right? If you want your work, let's say you're focusing on a certain genre like horror poetry, and, and your last name is, I don't know if anyone has the last name Happy, but if your last name's like Happy, like think about it that way, right? And you have very dark writing, no one's really going to associate that. Really, it'll be kind of a bit disjointed, right? Some pen names feel like they just stick, like Stephen King. When we hear that name, right, we associate with his, his very abstract works and those worlds that turned into very cool, like, TV adaptations and, everything. But yeah, so there's different zings to names, and different, they may fit different, in terms of like what you're writing about. Think about it. If you want to have a pen name that zero ins on one specific topic, like your pen name focuses on all of like rather dark stuff, and then your actual name focuses on rather light stuff. I mean, you don't have to do it that way. You could put all of your work under a pen name, but some do that. They segment out their work by different pen names. Like somebody writes under a pen name only their romance works, right? And then, their other pen name is just for a mix of works, not central focus. Yeah. So just an example, myself, right? I mentioned my pen name is Vevna Forrow, and I'll share the origin story. I will take the time to do that. I know some in the community know I did a post about this, but I'll share it on the podcast. So I had come up with this pen name a few years after 2010. I think it was like the window between 2013 and 2014. I'd started taking a lot of my high school poetry assignments and creative writing work and publishing it, just self-publishing it as ebooks. And I was part of, again, some various writing communities and things like that. But a little bit prior to that, I had tried to publish my work under my real name. My nickname is Jazz. Most people call me Jazz, my folks, everyone, and I even use my middle name sometimes alongside it. But my first name, my last name, super, super common, by the way, my real name. Kaur is a very common last name. My first name, super common. And yeah, so I was like remembering, the times my parents would like search online. They said, look at all these Jazz Veens. Look at all of them. There's like thousands of them, or there was a lot in the search results, with the exact same name as me, right? And it's a very, very common name, especially in, Asia and, that region of globe and also parts of the world. So it's very common, actually. There are a lot of common names. It happens, right? My parents had brought up a couple of times across the years, maybe consider changing it. We should have called you this, Jazz. We should have called you this instead. My parents aren't like, I don't know, my parents told me my pen name sounds weird, but whatever. It doesn't suit me. I don't know. Some people said they like my pen name and some people said they don't. You'll get that feedback on whatever pen name you choose, As long as you're happy with it, that's totally cool. I mainly stuck with this pen name because it had a lot of memories with it, when I started writing and everything. Yeah, so let's go back. So back in 2013, 2014, right, I was part of writing communities and stuff. But prior to that, again, I came up with it when I was working on I was obsessed with YA stories as a kid. I had so many, the Maze Runner trilogy, Divergent series, Veronica Roth, K. Applegate Animorphs, Rick Riordan's works. I was really set on on a lot of various drawing throughout my life, just doing that quite heavily and then writing on the side. But I really wrote a lot more as in my middle school, high school days, and over time, like when I was much younger, not just poetry, I'm saying, like creative writings, short works. And I tried to make a YA series or a couple different ones, and they always turned out half-baked. But from that, some of the characters and the realm and world I was building was very European in a sense. So I was looking up like names of Irish and Scottish origins and things like that. I think I'd come across a couple of V names, and I was thinking about how Veen is in my first name, right? And then it sort of went from there. And then I recalled watching this movie in my grandparents' place back in Kuala Lumpur. It was Kisna the Warrior Poet movie, so Kisna, Kisna the Warrior Poet. Yeah, it's a 2005 movie, and it doesn't have a lot of poetry in it at all, guys, by the way, barely anything. It's, I guess you could consider the romance story poetic in nature, and it sort of reminds me of Lagan, a lot of people have seen Lagan, that movie, so per se, the, those movies, both of them have like I feel like what ifs and regret moments. And one movie is like, Kisna's like, sorry, spoiler here, but Kisna's like, you have feelings for this person. You have this like really powerful journey together, going through obstacles, and, you end up going separate ways, and one makes a promise to someone else, and there's always that, what if. And, in that film, I'll share with you guys, the main character was like, I only played the flute for her, and he wasn't playing it for his wife. So that's kind of heartbreaking, right? He was never playing, and I think he had kids with his wife and things like that. And, he obviously genuinely cared about her, but he only played the flute for, her, the woman he had fallen in love with, from a very, young age. So, and then the other movie, Lagan, I know I'm talking about movies, guys, but that's just how it happens. I talk about movies a lot in my podcast, but yeah. So Lagan is sort of like one of the main characters falls in love, and, training them for the competition and stuff for cricket, and he actually loves someone else, and he's sort of oblivious to the other woman saying, I love you, I think I've fallen for you, and it's very heartbreaking. And I think she ends up never marrying anyone after that, and it's so heartbreaking. So yeah, and I definitely can relate to the heartbreak scenes, their regrets and what ifs of those movies, I guess. But yeah, anyways, you get the idea. So my pen name, first name, Vevna, came from, inspired by that, Kisna, the warrior poet. And then I was dabbling in like the European origin realm of like some myths and legends. And, I was researching different parts of the world at that time. And I thought about, something dark that sounded like burrowing spiders, and then Forrow. And, so I was trying to come up with like a semi-dark pen name, but it was like, yeah, so anyways, it resulted in that. I had other pen names before that, and I stopped using them. And this year I tried briefly testing a new pen name, but I was like, nah, I decided to not do it and just stick with my pen name. Yeah. So yeah, that's how I came up with mine. I know, you're like, Jazz, why don't you just use your, But yeah, again, guys, I've totally tried selling books under my full real name, and it never really, generated any sales whatsoever. I think, less than 5 possibly. And a lot of my work was just sitting there. And until I changed my pen name, that's when I started to see, I think that's interesting how you may publish your work under one name and then see different results under another. Same thing with like job applications. I know people have totally done this. There's been stories and cases where people tried applying under just changing their name. And, they saw different results. I think that's so kind of messed up, but that's interesting. Yeah. So a pen name, of course, let's say there's 3,000 Johnny Englishes out there, and Def watched that comedy movie series, Johnny English too, by the way. But just example, let's say there's 3,000 out there in the world, or several thousand, right? If someone's searching for your work, right, yours, right, it's going to be lost in that haystack of Johnny Englishes, right? So think about, a pen name sort of differentiates you. It creates your own, you could say your own trademark, over a little bit. It's like a trademark in a sense. I mean, you're not, some people do trademark their names and things like that, but it's like that, in a sense. It's your world, right? You're creating a world around that pen name. And so I've seen, authors sometimes take bits of their real name, their middle name, and use it, or initials, right? And they'll do, like K.A. Applegate, right? The initials there. And we've seen it with several authors throughout history use initials and then their last name, or I've seen authors take 2 names and combine it into one new name. Of course, there's always random name generators, but I don't like those a whole bunch. So really take the time to think about, if you really want to have a pen name and you're, you want to keep that privacy. I know, again, several friends, the community, They have a account separated for their pen name and their personal page, multiple places. So just make sure you're not choosing a pen name that's been used heavily already. Do some searching, do some research, make sure that the pen name is, not really used by anyone. Again, you could run into issues with that if you choose a pen name that's already been taken and very, heavily, used. So make it unique, make it yours, do not, do not worry about, a whole lot in the case of, when you're submitting, right, a lot of places in the lit mag, literary arts world, they're totally okay with others submitting under pen names. And, so just know that's totally okay. And, something I did with my publications, I put my name alongside of my pen name, alongside of my actual name. Yeah. So it's my pen name and then brackets. That's what some places who have published my work did. They put it in brackets alongside. So if you want both names to show up in search results or to be discoverable, that's something they can do. Typically put your pen name and your author name. Not always. There are some, formatting things they typically do. Usually they'll just put your pen name, but they will, a lot of places are willing to accommodate that if you really want both your pen name and your, actual name side by side, in brackets. So, yeah, I ended up not having a huge deal with sharing both my pen name and my name, my actual name, because, when I started the podcast and I was doing things in the products and community, a lot already knew my name. So it didn't really make sense for me to conceal my pen name or anything like that. So, a pen name can definitely be a good choice. I know there are some topics that perhaps we don't see eye to eye on with our our loved ones, and things like that. And sometimes we do that, we write it under different names. So, and that's totally okay, and it is, there's topics like very, especially in the political nature, there's some publications that do nothing but political publications, some publications that do, different focuses and topics, right? So it really depends, as a writer, right, we typically write on all kinds of topics and events, but I know some writers absolutely do focus on, very specific genres and topics and themes and focuses. So having a pen name might make sense if you want to highlight that under one name, not different from your actual name. And, I think when you write under a pen name, you feel, and no one knows about it, right? You could perhaps feel less pressure or less worrying. You shouldn't worry about what others think about you, but you don't really have that stress or as much pressure as like, oh, I wonder if they're going to see this, my friends or someone, or, I worry what they'll say if they ever read this. You don't really have that pressure as a pen name. Your identity is concealed there, right? I know some poets just go by one name, they don't have a last name or anything. It's just one name that they go under for publications. And, so think about it very carefully when you're choosing your author name, whether it be for poetry, writing, or short stories or fiction, whatever type of work you do, even as an artist or a digital creator, your name, that is something that you're happy with, and some names are, again, they have just sort of like a zing to it, right? Like Darth Vader. When we hear Darth Vader, right, we automatically associate with like dark things, right? And Luke, I'm your father, right? Oh, that was a bad impression of Darth Vader. No, let me do it again. Luke, I'm your father. All right, I'm sorry, guys. I'm being all goofy with movies and references today, so I apologize. But so, think about it. Think about it very, very carefully. So many it took me a long time to come up with pen names. I literally remember writing a list of names on a scratch piece of paper. And it's okay to change your pen name after a while. It's okay even to have multiple pen names, but I think that becomes too difficult. I think it's really good to focus on one pen name and to carry it across, decades or years as long as you want. But I know some authors, decided to, we've seen it time and time again, some authors write under like a name that's perceived as to be a guy's name, just to see the difference as a test to the audience to see whether there's a difference, right, in response to it. They may have written a series of works under their name and it's very obvious, so there are some things that others do to test the waters of publication. So, and to conceal, their gender, they may have a different name, and things like that. It's really up to you. A lot of writers and poets are very open and honest, though, about, that. And you just have to really ask yourself, are there going to be more pros than cons from doing this pen name? And yeah, if you want your friends and family to know about your work and things like that, then perhaps don't really use a pen name unless your name is like super common and a bunch of writers have that name already, and it's just really hard to even find work under that. It can be tough. So yeah, do some searching, think about it. It can be a lot of fun though, coming up with a pen name again, so it shouldn't be stressful at all. I know a lot of things are stressful in the writing world, but coming up with a pen name is one thing that I found was enjoyable, and yeah, so that's all I can think of. So I hope this helps you, I love learning about others' like name and origin stories. A lot of artists and musicians and bands, they have some very cool names. They don't always use their, of course, real name, and it's interesting to learn how they came up with that name, and I love hearing that and how poets came up with their names. So, yeah. Again, I recently put these podcasts as in many places as possible, so, yeah, if you ever want to share your pen name origin story or anything, totally, you can comment or... if this episode helped you or any of the episodes, totally would love to see any feedback or anything like that. Totally welcome to. And I meant to say not honest, but more so I was referring to the fact that a lot of, people are, they don't really care or mind, that others know their pen name, but then a lot of people do. So it's like 50-50, I'd say. In terms of like being honest, I meant a lot of people are upfront about that, like this is a pen name, this isn't my real name, and I don't feel comfortable, giving that out. A lot of people are honest in that manner. A lot of writers and artists are, it doesn't make sense to, to lie in the writing and art world, that's what I'm saying. I mean, in terms of your identity and who you are and things you love, it's not cool to lie about things like that, but in the sense of protecting your identity, writing under a pen name you feel comfortable on, and that's very original and unique, and you feel represents, your work, that's totally fine. Yeah, so that's all I was saying. So, yeah. P.S. guys, so... some writers in the community, I know a couple, actually quite a few, had dealt with stalkers, actually. Some very, very extreme cases and things like that. So a pen name can be very beneficial, and, you always can change your pen name, down the road. It's not like you're stuck with it for life or anything, but once you establish a pen name for, 10, 20, 30 years, that is pretty much, going to stick with you for quite some time, right? But you can always change it, don't worry a whole lot about it. And if you have a pen name, like an idea for one, and you're not sure if you want to use it quite yet, best thing is, to make sure you reserve that, if you're kind of sure, but not 100% sure and not quite ready to use it, just reserve that. You can set up a domain for that pen name, a site page, and create a social media account. You don't have to fill that social media account with a bunch of posts or anything like that. You can just like have it reserved, if you're pretty sure you're going to use it one day, but you're not quite ready. So yeah, it can be, again, a case-by-case thing, whether a pen name will really benefit you. And I think, privacy is important in the world, but I think a lot of writers, eventually their pen names get out, secret identities are revealed, just like in comic books of superheroes, as I mentioned. And yeah, so something I mentioned earlier in the episode, I just want to state real quick again. So yeah, when you're coming up with a literary journal, magazine name, even the same thing I said, right? When you think about Dippity, I think of fun, I think of cowabunga vibe, surfing, but we don't publish surf poetry, vacation poetry, or anything like that. We publish all kinds of work. So yeah, it really, let's say the lit mag or journal is called Haunted House, right? The Haunted House, right? I don't know if there's one out there, but anyway, that's cool, by the way, if there is. But yeah, so let's say you're submitting hypothetically to the Haunted House lit mag, right? Just like hearing that, or you're thinking about it, someone's discussing it, and you said, oh, that sounds cool, I want to submit to it. If that is the name of it, you're going to think they only accept, horror poetry. Same thing can be said about, pen names. Some sound much darker in nature, some sound fluffy, perhaps, or very vibrant, so you have to think about it that way, so yeah, like when we hear like Edgar Allan Poe, right, some common ones, or if someone's last name is or pen name has Raven in it, right, or something, we sort of think like darker notes a little bit. That's just typically how it is, I guess, when we close our eyes. I wrote a poem on this actually because of, some things I saw in the world of just like applications in general. So when you close your eyes and hear someone's name, what do you see? I wrote a poem about this, and yeah, what do you see in your mind? Like, are you focusing just on the work, or does the name, it was more so towards the job market and applications and how people select others, like, because I've seen, on the news and things like that, people saying, I changed my name and got different results. So I think, again, that whole thing is interesting, how even authors see that when they apply a different name and, and everything, for example, so let's say you write a bunch of books under your real name and they're not moving, they're not selling or anything, and you create a pen name and you relaunch those books. Let's say you even do a slightly different cover on them too, or you could put the same cover. You could do a test and see. You can see whether there's any difference in results. And something I did was, I think what I did not a few years back, like literally over a decade ago, but I had put some of my books in that whole like free, there was like a free option, right? If people are a member, to read it digitally. And then, I saw the difference between that and my real name, and, the one with my pen name, I think, had gotten more sales. So I don't know. It's just a weird thing, with pen names and seeing different results and things, but it happens. So yeah, it doesn't hurt to try a pen name, right? If you're thinking about it, if it's crossed your mind, hey, maybe I should have a pen name, try it out. See if you like it, and totally go for it. A lot of writers, poets, artists, creators, musicians, artists, around the world have names that are separate from their actual. And yeah, of course, you could always change your name to your pen name too if you end up doing that, right? But should I change my name, guys, to that? No, I'm gonna keep my actual name too. But yeah, and my grandparents actually gave me my name when I was born in Minnesota. So my grandparents in Kuala Lumpur gave my name, and my parents were like, yeah, let's go with that name, I guess, basically. So I don't know. Yeah, but I thought it was always funny how my dad would say, we should have named you this instead. And yeah, I don't have the same last name as my parents even, by the way, guys. So yeah, and I don't read, actually. I've never bought Rupi Kaur's books. I've read most of, her work online and just through social media. A lot of last names out there that are very similar. or common last name, sorry, I mean. And yeah, I know we're all different fans of different writers. And, I didn't start my pen name because of, Rupi Kaur's work. I had started writing long before that. But I had held back a lot of my work and things like that. So, yeah, I'm not trying to be the next Rupi Kaur or the next best-selling poet or author. I'm just sharing some thoughts and, things I've gone through. And if it helps someone, that's great. And, yeah, so, yeah. Pen names, that is, you could write, I think there's actually some really read some articles online, a little bit more on pen names and things like that, things you need to take in consideration with publishers, like on a larger basis. There's some things there, right? I'm not sure how that works with larger publishers, and, of course they let you use a pen name probably, but on the back end, right, they'd probably know your real name for like, payments and things like that, right? So assuming that happens. So I don't have experience, with a publishing house, or getting into one with a manuscript acceptance or anything like that, besides writing my own lit mag and journal and press. So I do see a lot of writers, tell us, this is my name, but I prefer it be published under this name. So it happens, don't feel the need to use a real name if you really are concerned about that. Again, there have been some cases in the community where I've seen that is absolutely necessary because of events they've gone through in their life. They really want to keep their work private and away from others' eyes, like stalkers and things like that. I hope none of us ever, deal with that whole thing. Yeah, so I've had some weird things, like run-ins with like others short of like writing obsessively about me, and just for fun too, a mix of that, and putting some, humor things with rights over the years. And yeah, anyways, I'm not going to go into that, but just know that people have written things about me when I started writing poetry online, and a lot of us were all cooped up in, at home and things, right? There were some really interesting poems there from like dudes and other people in the community. So, yeah, guys and gals. Yeah. And, those poems always put a smile on my face, though they're pretty funny, I might add. Anyways, yeah, you can totally tell, sometimes when you have a stalker, or you feel uncomfortable, you shouldn't feel uncomfortable sharing your work and things like that. You shouldn't be scared, but a pen name can keep things like under lock and key for you, like almost like a private diary. And again, when you're ready, you can come forward to friends and family. You don't have to. You could keep your pen name secret for the next 50, 60 years, and that's totally okay. But, if you ever want to, share your work with your loved ones and say, hey, guys, this is actually me. This was all my work and under my pen name, and I want to show it to you guys. And, yeah, of course, not everyone is an avid reader or of creative writing and poetry per se. But, it's cool to share your work with your loved ones and stuff. I grew up a lot always showing more so my art to my parents. I said, look, Dad, look, Mom, what I drew. And they would always give me feedback on my artwork and stuff. And my writing, they didn't read a whole lot of my writing and stuff, but more so they looked at my artwork over the years. And yeah, so poetry isn't per se anyone's forte in my family, but my grandpa introduced me to poetry, and then he was like, later on, currently he says it's not popular, so it's a waste of time, essentially. And yeah, but yeah, so anyways, guys, have fun with it, create that pen name if you really want to, go for it, and see how it works out. It may stick, it may be something that sticks with you and you love. Do I love my pen name? I will say it was a childhood pen name, and I stuck with it because it just had a lot of history with it. You know how I started writing, and I never really took that pen name and used it a whole lot, until writing again in like 2020, 2021-ish. And yeah, so when I was going through some rather traumatic events at the time, I thought about, what's one thing I really wanted to do, you know? And I thought about all of that work and writing that I never shared with others, that was sitting, and I was like, what should I write this under? Name should I put this under? Because my name sucks. I didn't say my name sucks. I actually really like my name. People have said my full name is beautiful and that my nickname's really lovely too. And I get the joke a lot, do I like jazz music too for my nickname? But anyways, my name doesn't suck, but it's just very common. So I thought about my childhood pen name. That's the one that I started using again, and then sort of went from there. And then, and then I was like, it doesn't really matter to me if people know my pen name and my actual name, and I don't really care. Some people call me by my pen name, some people don't. It doesn't really bother me, but I prefer just to go by my, for friends and fam, my nickname is fine. So, and I've sort of put like what some poets and writers do. Sorry, I'm extending this way longer. What some writers do, they take the initial of their first name and then they put their last name right after it. So, that's sometimes I've done that with my pen name even. So, a lot of different routes you can go with a pen name. Be creative, and And one more PS note, guys. Sorry, just one more. I just wanted to tack this on and mention. So, I was referring to as a kid and in my childhood, I had written short stories a little bit. My mom used to buy me these composition notebooks, those speckled ones, and like the black and white ones. And they came in various colors too. So I had various stacks of those in my, bookcase shelves. And I used to chalk them up with short stories, doodles. The first ever drawings I did, guys, I'll share with you. The people never had like full faces. I used to just draw eyeballs on bodies and like balloon arms, and over time I drew and drew and drew, and I sort of developed a style. And I think as writers the same thing goes. When you write and write and write over time, others can sort of identify a certain style of writing from you. Like everyone has a very distinct style typically. Of course there's similarities perhaps from others, especially if someone's going to do, one of those after poems after another poet or something of that nature, an inspiration piece, right? But for the most part, a lot of writers out there in the community, in the world, have very distinct, unique styles. And therefore, it is important that you have a name that you're happy with and separates you from others, especially if you have a rather common name. You could have your work lost again in a haystack of work out there in bookshops, right? And it can be hard for others to find you. Additionally, something else to keep in mind, or I've seen from time to time on these sites, right, where others have identical names, there's mix-ups in, book claiming and listings, right? There are times I pointed out to poets, hey, your name showing up under this, it's not showing up, it's someone else's photo and name, under their profile. So mixed up author claiming profiles and different listings. I've seen that from time to time on Goodreads and Amazon especially. Of course, you can submit a ticket to have them look at that and address it. So, but it happens. So things like that. And you can minimize that, with, again, a very unique original pen name. Or, just keep on top of that, something to look out for too, if you're not using a pen name as well. So anyways, as a kid, I wrote short stories, and then more so, I'd say in middle school and high school, we had assignments, right, for writing flash fiction, short stories, and doing poetry, sets of poems. And I really took those, I would say, and tried to share those out and self-publish some of those. Of course, my writing back in middle school and high school was pretty distant from what it is today, but it was still something I was really passionate about, and the stories and characters I developed and the worlds and the scenes. I, of course, had a lot of one-star reviews on those, but there were absolutely a few poems out of those that others felt connected to or resonated with, which was a plus, a positive. Of course, I felt super messed up about the reviews back then, but I learned over time to, just like pay no mind to the reviews. It's going to happen. And I think it's fun to share your works from high school and middle school, even if they perhaps were on the lower quality, right? Not as refined and edited. We're all going to have typos as writers, and it happens. And sometimes it's nice to see raw, unedited versions of things from writers, and because that tells you it was, absolutely written by a human being, that it was heartfelt. You can tell, the typos and errors in there. That's something a human being does. Nowadays, we see all of this AI stuff, right? And it's just kind of disheartening. Of course, AI has some cool aspects to it, but it's disheartening to see that, content scraping, all of that of artists' work, both living and past, those who have passed away. And it's really, I think there should be something that addresses that further. I'm sure there's lawsuits and stuff still going on until today. But you just want to be careful, about the name you choose too, because you can wind up in legal trouble over certain name selections if it's been in use and you weren't aware in some place or form, before yours. So that's something to keep in mind. And anyways, I really enjoyed just sharing, my high school projects, my short stories, all of that. Yeah. And a lot of it didn't get positive reviews, but there were some, really nice comments on some of the work I did. One of my favorite earliest short stories I ever wrote was When the Time Goes, and that one sort of involves time travel, a lost love. A guy loses the woman he loves, and he's like, he sees the future and the different possibilities and things like that. And yeah, anyways, that was one of my faves because I really took the time to dive into that one and, refine it. And yeah, I took for the cover of that one, I'll share, I took a fishing dock trip, the bridge of it, and aged it down to a green moldy type thing, and used that as the cover, actually. And so between age 17 and 20, my pen name, I started using it and just took a break, because of college, and I was working full time, too, to pay for my school classes and things like that. So it sort of took a side, I set that side. And I returned to writing when, you want to share things that are very bizarre and unusual that perhaps no one else has ever gone through. So it's very hard for others to grasp it. So you try to share those experiences, whether it be traumatic, whether it be complex, in some way or form, to go through it. Because you can only move forwards in time, right? We can't go back, as my short story as a kid I wrote mentions. And I think as writers, we all leave, remnants of ourselves in the world, right? And breadcrumbs and things like that. And with our work, tied back to our life or various feelings we have. Sometimes we put characters in our own shoes a little bit, or use tidbits of our memories or some things we thought of, So poetry is awesome. Publishing is awesome. And it's cool that we can create pen names around, again, I mentioned our own worlds, as writers and authors. And I love seeing that, I'm a fan of several authors who use pen names and don't use pen names. So we all are. I think it's just some have a zing to them, like a little memorable name that, it just fits, right? Like Goosebumps, right? R.L. Stine. I think a lot of us couldn't imagine, a different name on that. The work would still be awesome and stellar, regardless of a name that sounds cool. It really comes down to the quality of work. But sometimes a pen name can help you differentiate your work a little bit further, and not get lost in the sea of, common names. And a lot of times people can find your name and other series you've written, other works, right, all together in online bookshops, and they're like, hey, I didn't know about this book or this collection. I'm going to check it out. So it's good to be consistent and stick with one name so others can find your other publications. And of course, it's totally fine, as I mentioned again, to change your name, 10, 20 years from now, to try different pen names. And if you're curious on, how others would respond to a pen name, just take a work you have, right, and test the waters with that pen name and see the reception of it. And it's cool to do that. And again, you can totally reserve a website or a social media page under that name just in case you really want to move forward with it. And if you're not going to use it, you can always remove those pages and discontinue, paying for that domain and stuff. And, if you're not 100% sure or don't want to go forward with it, it's not necessary to do all that. But it can be beneficial to, have that stuff reserved, because it's hard when accounts are, you have a name you want to use and an account already has that name, so you have to do variations of it with like a number or some other things, to make it different. And yeah, so I hope this episode helped you. I know it was quite long again. I keep saying I'll do shorter episodes around the same length, but this is just going to happen because I'm talking on different topics and covering memories along with, some tips and thoughts. So I hope it was helpful. And yeah, so if you're thinking about choosing a pen name, and you've been thinking about it for a while, I'd say totally go for it and see what happens, right? You never know. It could be a pen name that you end up, using for the rest of your life. And it could be one that others really like too, everyone has their thoughts on names, fitting people and things like that, but ultimately it comes down to whether you like your pen name. And again, I didn't mean my name sucks again, but it sucks that it's a common name, right? Very common. Otherwise, I'd probably use it on my publications, like all of them, but I think in regards to the writing world, again, it helps to have, in that case, a pen name. Absolutely. So take care, guys. Yeah.